Ever get tricked by those fancy coffee descriptions? You know, the ones that promise notes of caramel and a hint of hazelnut?
Oh, yeah. I think we've all been there. The marketing can be pretty tempting.
It totally is. But
Hmm.
then you take that first sip and, well, it just tastes like coffee.
It does, doesn't it?
And that's what we're diving into today, this whole idea of coffee flavor notes and whether they're actually, well, a bit of a marketing gimmick.
Right. We've got some excerpts here that get into how this whole thing affects us, the coffee drinkers.
Yeah, I mean, one of the excerpts even mentioned a study that found people were actually less satisfied with their coffee when they were given a bunch of specific tasting notes
Oh, wow.
compared to folks who just got like a basic description.
That is interesting. I mean, it makes sense when you think about it. Like, if you're expecting a super specific flavor and it's not there,
You're going to be disappointed.
exactly. It's like setting yourself up for a letdown. You're told to look for blueberry and dark chocolate,
Yeah.
and all you taste is, well, coffee.
Right. But then another excerpt argued that these sensory descriptions, these flavor notes, can actually help educate people about coffee. So how do we balance these two sides? Are flavor notes good or bad?
Well, I think it comes down to finding that right balance. Instead of just listing a bunch of fancy flavors, maybe roasters should focus more on the actual qualities of the beans.
You mean like where they're from?
Exactly. The origin, the processing methods.
Okay, now hold on. What does processing even mean when we're talking about coffee?
Oh, good point. For those who aren't familiar, processing refers to how the coffee cherry is treated after it's harvested.
Ah,
And there are all these different methods. Some use water, some dry them naturally, and the way it's processed has a huge impact on the final flavor.
so the processing is one part of the story.
Yeah.
And then what about the roasting?
Yeah, the roasting is key too. That refers to how long the beans are roasted and at what temperature, and that can totally change the flavor.
Right, like a light roast versus a dark roast.
Exactly. Light roasts tend to be brighter, maybe more acidic, while dark roasts bring out those chocolatey or smoky flavors.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. But wouldn't all this talk about origins and processing make coffee seem even more complicated? Like, how's the average person supposed to keep up with all that?
Well, it can feel a bit overwhelming at first, but I think ultimately it's about being transparent. Giving people the full story about their coffee.
Right.
Because when you know where your beans came from and how they were processed and roasted, you can make better choices about what you buy.
And maybe even appreciate those subtle flavor differences more.
Exactly. It's about appreciating the whole journey of the beans, from the farm to your cup.
So it's not necessarily about ditching the whole concept of tasting notes, but maybe shifting the focus.
Yeah, maybe. It's about looking beyond those catchy descriptions and really understanding what makes each coffee unique.
And sometimes those descriptions can feel a little, I don't know, yeah, made up, like they're trying to sell you on an experience rather than the coffee itself.
And that's where I think we lose sight of something really important. People have been enjoying coffee for centuries, long before we started coming up with all these fancy flavor notes.
Right. It's a simple pleasure, really.
And maybe it's time we get back to that. Enjoying coffee for what it is, a delicious aromatic drink.
Totally agree. So next time you see a coffee with a laundry list of tasting notes, take it with a grain of salt.
Maybe a coffee bean.
Yeah, a coffee bean. And remember, those descriptions are just one small part of the story. The real flavor comes from the whole journey of the coffee, and that's worth exploring.
Now, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been misled by those fancy descriptions? Or maybe you had a coffee that really did live up to the hype. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, let's keep this conversation brewing.